All right, so today the question is, how do I grow in contentment with God's plan? So, it's funny as we go through these lessons, and I did not see this coming. It's funny as we go through these lessons that uh, how much of it ties to what we've been studying in Ecclesiastes. It's it's amazing. So my very first point, it's a great source of comfort knowing that our times are in God's hands. That's Ecclesiastes 3:11. And also from Ecclesiastes 3, we've learned that our proper response to knowing of God's sovereignty, knowing of what's working out, our proper response is to rejoice. And you stop and say, wait a second, there's a lot going on I don't really feel like rejoicing about. Quite the contrary. But we're not rejoicing in our circumstances. We're not rejoicing in those things that are happening. Although there are times where there's cause to rejoice. But that's not the cause of rejoicing. The cause of rejoicing is knowing how God is working through these things in life under the sun, and of living in a cursed world. And yet, God in His grace is taking these things and working them to our eternal good. So a big part of this is to rejoice in our station in life, and then how God is using us. Oh, and that's the other part, while looking ahead to our inheritance. We look ahead to the new heavens and the new earth. We were talking about that. The elder from Sacramento, he and I, as we were driving, he was driving me to the airport. And along the many construction roads in Sacramento. But we were talking about that, holding on to that promise of the new heavens and new earth. Saying, let's remember this conversation 100,000 years from now. We're saying, hey, you remember that time driving out of Sacramento? And so on. Well, so while we have these things happen, we hang on to that promise, but then that causes us then to rejoice. And so that brings me to contentment. And just a few examples here before we jump into it. Didn't John the Baptist, remember John the Baptist, he told the soldier in Luke 3, verse 14, be content with your wages. Didn't the Apostle Paul say that he learned in whatever state I am to be content? Paul told Timothy that godliness with contentment is great gain. The writer to the Hebrews said, let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have. So then the question is raised, and I thank you for your help, because I'm not quite sure I would have taken it this way, but because of what you talked about last week, that's what I focused on. So the question is raised, are my efforts to improve my station to earn more money, are these really an act of rebellion against God and a sign of discontentment? I think that nails it good. Well, I can tell you the answer. You know what's coming. The answer is, depends. Maybe. So bear with me as I kind of build the case. And what we're going to do is we're going to take a look at two key principles in building this case. And then I'm going to give one example, and then we'll spend the rest of the time hearing from you. Okay, now apply these principles. Tell me at what point in this circumstance it's covetousness, and at what point it's being a good steward. So, all right, ready? And they're off. So we start with the principle of contentment. And right now, I am content to take off my jacket, because we're going to get serious. All right, what color am I going to be content with?
Green.
Thank you. All right. So here we go. Got green. So we start with the principle of contentment. It's a weird green, isn't it? Okay, the principle of contentment. You might be surprised to learn that, did you know that contentment is actually one of the commandments? One of the 10 commandments? Do you ever think about that? Do you ever think, yeah, I am commanded to be content? Which commandment would that be? 10th commandment. Exactly. Exodus 20, verse 17, you shall not covet your neighbor's house. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife, nor his male servant, nor his female servant, nor his ox, nor his donkey, or anything that is your neighbor's. So let's take a look at that word covet. So we find this in the 10th commandment. And the word is covet. And so this word means delight in or desire, or more accurately, to lust after. Because, I mean, just delight is not a big issue or desire, but then when you put it in the context of lusting after it, now it's something different. So the 10th commandment, have you ever wondered about that? It's like kind of a strange one, you know, don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't steal, don't lie, don't covet. Okay, yeah, I can see that. It's a good thing not to covet, but how does that all fit? It's more than just a standalone command to not covet. It is, you know, if you say, here's the 10 commandments right here. So let's see how I do this. It is, bear with me. Does that look like an umbrella?
I was gonna say it was like hatching out of an egg or something like that.
All right, let's do that. All right. I gotta work on my illustrations. 10 commandments. So the 10th commandment is actually the umbrella over all the commandments. So it's not just what we do outwardly with the commandments, it's what we do inwardly. That was the whole point of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount. You know, I was fond of asking during candidates and credentials exams of potential or licensing pastors and so forth. And one of my questions was, so which new commandment did Jesus teach in the Sermon on the Mount? And of course the answer was none. What he was doing, if you look at the Sermon on the Mount, he was teaching the correct application of the 10 commandments. The Pharisees had it all down to a system of outward obedience in all these different ways. And that's what makes sense. So now when he says, you know, you've heard it said, you know, about, what did he say about that you shall not murder, and whoever murders will be in danger of the judgment. Well, I say to you, whoever is angry with his brother without a cause shall be in danger of the judgment. So it's not just what you do, it's what you do it for and who. Same thing with the adultery. We've talked about that, about the lusting and such after another. Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount gives examples from the 9th commandment and the 8th commandment. And while the Sermon on the Mount really touched on the second table of the law, those commandments that we owe to one another, it still applies to the first table too. You shall have no other gods, not make any carved images, those types of things. The desire to be my own God is coveted, isn't it? You shall have no other gods before me. Well, I want to be my own God. That was the very first sin. I'm coveting godnessness. That's not a real word. the desire to be my own God, the desire in worshiping the way I think best. That's coveting. It's a heart that's away from God. Or even the flippant use of God's name. You know, I'm above that. I can say your name however I want. Uh, that's a 10th commandment thing. Um, Delighting in being the boss of myself. So what does this have to do with contentment? Everything. The 10 commandments deal primarily with the heart and why we do or don't do what we do. So this is very important when we talk about this and understanding how the 10th commandment fits to everything else. Actually, coveting, covet is exactly opposite of being content. They're antithetical to one another. To not be content is to covet. So let's talk through some examples. Ready to fire up those Bibles. Go to Luke chapter 3. We're going to look at verses 12 and 14. Anybody?
I have it. All right. Then tax collectors also came to be baptized, and he said to them, and said to him, "Teacher, what shall we do?" And he said to them, "Collect no more than what is appointed for you." Likewise, the soldiers asked him, saying, "And what shall we do?" So he said to them, "Do not intimidate anyone or accuse falsely, and be content with your wages."
So here John is teaching repentance. Instead of this, do this. So after telling the tax collectors, don't collect any more than what you're supposed to collect, that's how they padded their wages. You know, if you owed $100 in taxes, they'd come to you and say you owe $250 in taxes, and of course the rest of them went to their own pocket. But after telling the tax collectors to collect no more than what was required, he told the soldiers to be content with your wages. Now, why? Why be content with your wages? Discontentment is what was at the heart of intimidating and falsely accusing. So by intimidating, the soldiers can intimidate, then comes the bribes. By doing these things, they can exact more money from people. So again, we find the 10th commandment is over the 8th commandment, which had to do with stealing. Now go to Philippians 4, verses 10 to 13. And whoever's next on this.
I can do it.
But I rejoiced in the Lord greatly that now at last your care for me has flourished again. Though you surely did care, but you lacked opportunity. Not that I speak in regard to need, for I have learned in whatever state I am to be content. I know how to be abased, and I know how to abound. Everywhere and in all things I have learned both to be full and to be hungry, both to abound and to suffer need. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me.
So we see that passage all the time. I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. Now here's the context.
And it's not talking about like football players.
It's not. Nope. It's not talking about flipping your running back over into the end zone. By the way, in high school that would have been a penalty. Let's just do.
Really?
Yep. Mm-hmm.
Oh.
That would not have been a popular flag, I'm sure.
How do you decide? I don't know.
So yeah, there's specific ways to decide on that one.
Can't push them at all.
Can't
You
get.
couldn't even
behind them.
push them.
Nope. Now, if there's a crowd that's moving forward, there's nothing you can do about that. But if you see hand on the runner actually pushing, that would draw a flag. But more than that, back to the lesson.
That's the next one.
Well, so in this case, where Paul was thankful for the financial support from the church in Philippi, he expressed that he could live under any condition, rich or poor. And why could he be content? Why could he live in being rich as well as being poor? Because he could do all things through Christ. The richness and the poorness is not the issue. Christ is the issue. His thankfulness was in line with the 10th commandment and not from resisting riches. So if you look at that and say, is it a sin to be rich? No. Is it a sin to be poor? No. It's not. It's what is your contentment in those stations, and what do you base that contentment on? It's on Christ. Now look to 1 Timothy 6 through 10. Whatever's up next.
Six.
I have it. Now godliness with contentment is great gain, for we brought nothing into this world, and it is certain we can carry nothing out. And having food and clothing, with these we shall be content. But those who desire to be rich fall into temptation and a snare, and into many foolish and harmful lusts, which drown men in destruction and perdition. For the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil, for which some have strayed from the faith in their greediness, and pierced themselves through with many sorrows.
So what's the sin in the passage?
Desiring money or loving money?
It's the desire. By the way, that word desire is the same word used for covet. So the desire or the covet to be rich. This is a desire of wealth for wealth's sake. How much is enough? Just a little bit more. I had that fellow cyclist. He once said to me, he said, "Do you know how many bikes a person really needs?" In my mind, I'm thinking, well, road bike, mountain bike, probably 2. He said, no, n plus 1. Whatever you have, plus 1 more. That is covetousness. Money itself is not the sin. The love of money is the sin. Now let's take a look at one more passage. Hebrews 13, verses 5 and 6. Arm wrestle.
I'll read it again. Let your conduct be. Oh, yeah, sorry. Let your conduct be without covetousness. Be content with such things as you have. For he himself said, I will never leave you nor forsake you.
Well,
Verse 6.
yes, please.
So we may boldly say, the Lord is my helper. I will not fear. What can man do to me?
So leading up to verse 5, the writer was talking about the honorable nature of marriage. Then he follows with the principle of contentment. The principle given for contentment with your spouse is to be content with who or what you have and not covet or desire others. Why? We see in verse 6, because the Lord is sufficient. There is nothing to fear. My soul is secure. What can man do to me? Nothing. So what's missing in each of these passages dealing with contentment? I mean, gaining wealth is not wrong. Having health is not wrong. The marriage bed is not only wrong, but it's honorable. So what's missing in all of this? It's all related to the heart. It's all related to the reason behind this. While gaining wealth is not wrong, how you gain wealth and why you want to gain wealth determine if gaining wealth is wrong. Having health is not wrong. What you do with wealth and why you want it to hang on to wealth determines right from wrong. Misplaced desire in marriage is wrong. One more thing about coveting. I'll just go ahead and do this one. Colossians 3:5. And this is a key point from this. Therefore, put to death your members which are on the earth: fornication, uncleanness, passion, evil desire, and covetousness. And then he defines covetousness. Covetousness, which is which is idolatry. That is what covetousness is. It's idolatry. A heart that seeks those things contrary to God's commands is setting up idols. That's what coveting is all about. Hence, at the core of contentment, we have two principles. And we're going to just hang these up here, come back to them a little bit later on. So the two key principles of contentment. Let's see how I worded it. First of all, contentment is a heart commandment. Behind loving God and loving neighbor. I think I've got one more little part with that. Loving God and loving neighbor. Oh, and this is a quote from I'm out of the 60s now, a quote from a 1980s song. Michael W. Smith. It's not just what you do, but what you do it for. And who. So that's the first point, first principle. Second principle on this, contentment is thankfulness. For God's provision. Even in the worst circumstances, if you look hard enough, you can find God's grace. Contentment is thankfulness for God's provision. So those are the principles for contentment. Any thoughts on that? How are we doing so far? All right, let's get to stewardship. So the principle of stewardship now. Which at first glance almost looks like these are at odds with one another. Stewardship, or to be a steward, is to be a manager. What's another word for that? Manager or superintendent. In my career, well, I had this lofty title. The truth is, I was managing something. Managing, in this case, it was an organization. So that's what a steward does. But now the very first thing that you find out about it, the thing about stewardship is the steward is always a slave. Biblically, a steward was always a slave, or in today's nomenclature, would be, could even be an employee.
Same.
Same thing. That's funny. Yeah, so, manager, but when you're a slave, what does that mean? What are you managing?
Someone else's.
Someone else's stuff. That's right. So as a steward, that further means the stuff, that's theological language, that stuff doesn't belong to you, or let's put it in the positive, belongs to someone else. Particularly during campaigns where you're raising money and everything, I was fond of telling everybody, remember that we are entrusted with resources for the purpose of accomplishing the mission of the organization. This isn't our money. We're using money given to us to accomplish these purposes. We are being stewards. So that's a very, very important thing. Genesis 1:28. God said, every lesson we end up somewhere in Genesis 1:28. Genesis 1:28, God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, fill the earth and subdue it, have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Mankind was appointed by God from the very beginning to be what? To be stewards over all creation. We are stewards over all of this. God set us up as stewards, and the fall didn't change that. That message was repeated even after the fall. So still, while we manage all the resources here, to whom does creation belong? It's God's. Psalm 24, verses 1 and 2. So let me list these out. So we got Genesis 1:28, Psalm 24, verses 1 and 2. The earth is the Lord's in all its fullness, the world and those who dwell therein. Pretty much everything belongs to God. There are those that, so not only is the Lord's creation and everything in it belong to the Lord, let's talk about stewards. There are those who steward well and those who don't do it well or steward poorly. Let's take a look at that. Luke chapter 12, verses 42 to 46. Somebody want to read that one? Luke 12, 42 to 46.
42 to 47.
Yes, please.
And the Lord said, who then is the faithful and wise manager, whom his master will set over his household to give them a portion of food at the proper time? Blessed is that servant whom his master will find so doing when he comes. Truly I say to you, he will set him over all his possessions. But if that servant says to himself, my master is delayed in coming, and begins to beat the male and female servants, and to eat and drink and get drunk, the master of that servant will come on a day when he does not expect him, and at an hour he does not know, and he will cut him in pieces and put him with the unfaithful.
Yeah, so there was a steward that did well, and a steward who did not. It's the same thing, managing other people's stuff. I'm embarrassed to tell you that, I don't know, I was probably about 10 years old, and there was somebody like in the next block over who, I know they knew our situation, and so gave me an opportunity. They were going to leave town, and so I remember, this was huge, $10. They gave me $10 to water their flowers while they were gone. Guess what I didn't do? I took the $10, but the day before they were to come home, I watered the flowers. They weren't looking very good. I was not a very good steward. In fact, I was a really bad steward at that time. Well, consider the parable of the talents, Matthew 25, verses 14 through 30. You know the parable of the talents, the guy who had 5 talents or whatever, and then he went and doubled it. The one who had 3 talents doubled it. The one with 1 talent didn't do anything with it. Yep, it's the same principle. The stewards who managed gains were commended. The steward who did nothing was removed. So now let's apply that. But we're not just talking about money. All of creation belongs to the Lord. Therefore, we are stewards over all creation. So think of ourselves. What does that mean? What does that mean for us? What do we own? Or not what do we own? What do we steward over? We all have some money, so we're stewarding that, right? Which doesn't belong to us. We're managing it. Okay, what else? What else do we manage about ourselves?
I mean, just your time.
Your
Like, what
time?
you
Yeah.
like, choose to do.
Mm-hmm. Your relationships, stewarding your relationships. You're
Parenting.
stewarding, I'm sorry,
Parenting.
parenting, yeah. Your abilities, your stewarding, the abilities that you have. Oh, I'm sorry to burst your bubble. That didn't come from you. That was provided for you. So First Corinthians 6, verses 19 through 20 confirms that all we have and all we are belong to the Lord, and we're the stewards thereof. So 1 Corinthians 6, 19 to 20. Or do you not know that your body is the temple of the Holy Spirit who is in you, whom you have from God, and you are not your own? For you were bought at a price. Therefore, glorify God in your body and in your spirit, which are God's. Okay, so now think about this. Think about all you are. Every attribute that you have is a gift from God. It belongs to God. We are not our own. And now we're stewarding those things. Question and answer 1 of the Heidelberg Catechism. You know this well. What is your only comfort in life and death? That I, with body and soul, in life and in death, am not my own, but belong to my faithful Savior, Jesus Christ. So put it all together and they get these key principles of stewardship. All right, so now we've got this column over here. I've got 4 of them. So these 4 principles. First of all, everything belongs to God. We are not our own. Secondly, we are stewards of all God has provided. Are you a gifted musician? Well, guess what? That was given to you, and you're to be a steward of that gift. Okay, so 3, back down here. The third one that I have, we are to exercise good stewardship in loving God and one another. So now how we use those gifts, does that reflect being a good steward? And does that good stewardship reflect loving God and loving one another? And then fourthly, exercising good stewardship um, includes constant growth. Remember the parable, growing the talents? There's constant growth. It's part of being a good steward. Constant growth and care in managing what God has provided. And those things that we talked about before, money. So we manage our money in such a way that the money grows. And then what do we do with the money? You know, in providing for the family. Remembering this is not your own. In giving to the church, supporting other causes, or maybe even investing in capital, which creates jobs. I mean, all those things, how you use your money. Well, it's not just money. We talked about our abilities. So that also means, how do we grow our abilities? That's why we go to school, by the way. That's why we learn a vocation. That's why we continuously develop our skills, because that's what we're doing, growing that which was given to us. Same thing can be said about relations. We grow those relations, our ability to manage relations, our ability to build up and support one another. Our possessions and how we take care of our possessions. I mean, all those things. So now let's take the principles of stewardship and the principles of contentment, and now let's strike a balance. Let's put these things together and see what it looks like. So, yes, you saw here, this is my own diagram. See how this fits? But what we're really talking about is God's provision and God's commands. In fact, the arrows go both ways. Each is reflected in each. God's provision, which could actually be called God's decretive will. That's his will over which we have no control. Now we're talking about looking under the tapestry. We're looking at things under the sun. We're looking at circumstances, all those things. Those are there. God has sovereignly said that's what's happened. And how do we respond? God's commands. In trying to obey God's commands, that impacts things, and that God's commands would be his what's called preceptive will. We know his will here. We don't know his will here. But we take a snapshot, and how do we respond? We respond by obedience. And by obedience, we're responding to these conditions. And so now, if you follow it down below, what we're doing is we are stewarding. And we either steward well or we steward poorly. So this relationship here, and this is where it comes into contentment. Contentment is the same thing as stewarding well. Coveting is the same thing as stewarding poorly. So let's see the relationship between, okay, we got this. So I'm going to give you one example, and then I want to ask you some questions. Proverbs 24:27 says, "Prepare your outside work, make it fit for yourself in the field, and afterward build your house." Okay, so here's the scenario. As young adults, you're in preparation. You are preparing for establishing covenant households. Right now, your circumstance is singleness. At some point, and even now, I have no doubt that there's somewhere in there some desire. Yeah, I'd like to be married. So there's that desire for marriage and establishing your own home. But what does the proverb tell us? Here's the command. The proverb tells us that prepare your outside field first. Now, that doesn't mean go marry a farmer. But what it does mean is prepare yourself in order to provide for a household. So let's apply this. Increase your ability to support the household. So this includes training in a vocation or profession. And I will say, and okay, I'm getting ready to get canceled again, so here we go. This is particularly true for men toward providing enough income to support a wife and children. Our response in contentment with this command and stewardship in carrying out his provision. So because of this, to steward well, I want to grow things and prepare myself so that I can adequately provide. Well, this is also true for women toward increasing the ability to support that household, and that may include managing a home, rearing and teaching children, and may even be needed to augment household income. Of course, there's also that unknown time of singleness in which you may need to support yourself. So our response and contentment with his command and stewardship in carrying out his provision. So you too are building up your skills in preparation for that time. So in this, let me ask you, and I don't have any answers written here, but so as young adults preparing for this time, what would stewarding poorly look like in this circumstance?
Wasting your time, I guess, doing frivolous things. So I don't think of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what would covetousness look like related to this command? So in this situation, what would covetousness look like?
Would you say that there's a difference between wanting something and like not being able to live without something? You know, like I may really want this thing, but I'm like, and maybe I'll work towards it, but like I'm not happy until I have this thing, you know.
Mm-hmm. Does it become an idol at that point?
I guess you're like, would that be what kind of, I don't know. Because like at that point it's discontentment if like you're not happy if you don't have it.
Mm-hmm.
You know. So, yeah. Like if I really want a house and I'm saving up to buy a house, that
Sure.
doesn't make me discontent.
No, that doesn't.
But if like I'm not happy till I have a house or something, I feel like
if you're obsessive, if that house is going to, if you set this house up on a shelf and say, I am not going to be happy until this happens.
Like I'm happy with my apartment for right now, but I do really want a house.
That's okay. It's a good desire. Mm-hmm. But at what point does it become an idol? And you're back to what's the heart behind it? And that's why you say, well, it depends.
So, like, say you have say you have a desire that's like unhealthy and like an idol, like
Mhm.
how do you produce contentment in yourself? How do you change that?
How do you change that? Well, so now we're back to the whole concept of repentance. So confessing your sin and repenting. Repenting is, as you know, and I know that you know, is the act of changing directions. So if you do set up an idol, you recognize it as such, you confess it, and turn the other way.
I guess if you focus on what you have instead of what you don't have.
Mm-hmm. Be content with what you have. But that doesn't mean, contentment does not necessarily mean don't strive or don't have goals or don't try to reach, because we're also responsible stewards of what we have. But I think you hit a good point though. Our happiness is not determined by achieving those things. Our happiness is in the Lord. Period. Maybe the Lord is saying, well, either you're not ready for this, or I'm going to make you work a little bit harder for this, or actually you should be pursuing this. And we don't know those things. Our job is over here, simply to be obedient in whatever state that we're in, and continue to work at doing these things as a steward. Does that make sense? One of the things that I thought of, what does covetous look like in relation to that scenario that I gave? Covetous looks like taking a shortcut. So taking, let's say you're single and you desire to be married. This is very, very common, way too common. We're reaping those things, and so take the shortcut. Let's engage in activity as if we were married. That'll snare them. That'll do it. That's, yeah. Turn it into an idol. And that's not being obedient over here. Let me ask you this. You don't like the direction that your life is going, your job's okay, but you're not sensing any particular direction. That's you. Is this discontentment or is it stewardship?
I think it's stewardship because, God gave you the ability to better your situation. So, I don't know. If you're not happy with that, I think you have the freedom to change it.
It's also just the why still. That's what you're saying, is it's always about the why. Always about why.
Yep.
So in that instance, I mean, you could say, well, I want a better paying job because I want to buy more stuff. I want to get a better whatever. I want to go on vacation more, or I want to provide a better life for those around me. Glorify God with what I've been given. So it's always the why behind it.
Yeah, you nailed it. As you're speaking, is reminded I'm a young married man, and as a youth director, with this powerful salary of $9,000 a year, which was not very much. But I gotta tell you, but and I had some salesman type guy visit with me, and I won't name the company, but he said, life is like that. He said, you're in bed, you wake up to an alarm, You go to work, and you come home, and you go to bed, and wake up to an alarm, and go to work, and then do this, and then keep, and life is just, that's all you do. He said, it can be more. Of course, it's buying into his product and selling his product and so forth, where you can be in control, and you can go on vacations, you can buy a boat, you can do all this and so forth. And at the end, I wasn't a very good prospect. And I said, I actually like going to work. We're supposed to work. And so if it's something where you're trying to bypass work, then you're not being obedient here. So, yeah. So we didn't buy into it.
Wait, what was he trying to sell?
Yeah, I won't say the name of the company. Offline, I might say it, but. Yeah. So in answer to the question, how do I grow in contentment with God's plan? We learn that contentment is opposite of coveting, which refers to our heart's desire related to God's commands and his provision. We also learn that we are stewards of God's provision and have a responsibility to exercise growth and care in managing his provision. So it's back to this, and this is where I'm saying it's the same thing we've been studying in Ecclesiastes all along. It's the conclusion that we're going to reach at the end of our study of Ecclesiastes. We have no control over God's provision. But we do have a responsibility to steward well what he has provided. And good stewardship includes growth, learning, and sanctification within the boundaries of his commands. It all comes back down to that. Other thoughts? Did we adequately answer the question?
So would you say it's wrong to, for example, change a job purely because you don't like this job and you just want to have another one? Because I mean, that would be aimed at your own happiness.
Yeah. So my question back is back to the why. Why don't you like this job?
It's a bad fit.
It's a bad fit. You know what? Find another job. It's okay. And thankfully, we live in an economy where you're allowed to do that, where we have the freedom to do that.
I mean, back in ancient times, if you don't like being a farmer, I mean, too bad.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. So no, it's nothing's wrong with that. Even to the person who wants to get a promotion or work toward a promotion. Actually, I think that's good stewardship. Because what you're doing is you're trying to increase your responsibility, you're trying to prepare yourself for taking on more, and even be in a better position to provide for the family.
Let's say I really like to travel. Is it wrong to want to get a job that pays more so I have money to travel more?
Well, yeah, I would say that would be another one of searching your heart. The desire to travel is not a bad desire. Obsessively traveling, or I'm not going to be happy unless I travel. That's then I would question the idolatry or the.
It's like It's a Wonderful Life.
It's a Wonderful Life. Yeah. Yeah, I can identify with some of that. The yeah, so it's always hard because especially at this time of life for you, the desire and the view is to see lines, black and white lines, But then as you grow older, you see there needs to be some discernment on those lines. Yeah. Keep going. I mean, that was a good example. What other examples?
I guess so. It's like not. It's okay to do things aimed at your own happiness if that's not like overshadowing other things,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
or if it's not like obsessive.
Yeah, obsessive would be a key part. Or here's another measurement: if it's causing you to, this desire, is it causing you to be disobedient to any of God's commandments? That sends up another flag. Said, no, danger, warning, idol being made. Yep. Danger, Will Robinson.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Okay. Good. Phew. Next week, Ecclesiastes 5, 1 through 7. So I'm borrowing the title from Expository, Reformed Expository Commentary. I might change the title after I go through it. It's called Sights Under the Sun.